After a few years of dormancy following 20th Century Fox's purchase by Disney, the Alien franchise has really been brought back in full force recently thanks to a wave of comic books, video games, the film Romulus, and now the Hulu TV show Alien Earth. It's the first TV show in the nearly half-century of the Alien franchise, and alongside its larger scope comes a need to be ambitious, original, and thought-provoking. But I have one other word to describe Alien Earth. Mid. Okay, so clearly I'm not a huge fan of Alien Earth, but before we dive into spoilers and unpack why, let's set the table a little bit. Alien Earth is created by Noah Hawley, who also serves as showrunner, and is set in the year 2120, with a focus on a corporation we've never seen in this series before, Prodigy. Run by the young genius Boy Cavalier, Prodigy is one of 5 companies that control the Earth and the colonized solar system. And our story is sparked by 2 specific world-changing incidents. Prodigy has created the first ever hybrids, downloading human consciousness into synthetic bodies, here with young, terminally ill Marcy transformed into the hybrid Wendy, played by a very effective Sydney Chandler. And just as the first batch of hybrids are created from children, a Weyland-Yutani spaceship crash lands in New Siam, controlled by Prodigy. Of course, on board is a xenomorph alongside 4 other alien specimens. And with the situation too dangerous for a normal team, our newly made hybrids are sent in, and of course, things go wrong from there. Alien Earth was originally announced in December 2020 with Noah Hawley as the showrunner and creator. And Hawley has done a lot of different things over the years, movies, TV shows, and books, but it's the TV shows that he's most well known for, specifically showrunning Fargo and Legion, both for FX, which is the channel alongside Hulu for Alien Earth. And while this is 8 episodes long with less than an hour for each episode, I think one of the problems of Alien Earth is that there's simply not enough story for all that runtime, which you think would be the opposite really, because this is telling a new expansive take on the sci-fi future world of the Alien franchise. In the past, the Alien movies have really been super focused. Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, and Alien Resurrection have pretty tightly contained small location stories that sort of hint at the larger world. Aliens is probably the biggest of those because we see a little bit more outside of the just single spaceship that we see in Ridley Scott's original Alien, but beyond that, they're mostly just context for a story of survival and fighting a giant crazy monster. So with Alien Earth, the promise is that we're going to get a really expansive take on Earth in the future, these different corporations, this promise of different alien species that have been captured by this team and now been brought back to Earth, and of course the larger premise of xenomorphs actually on the loose on the Earth. That is a scary premise and is one of the driving factors of trying to stop the xenomorphs in a lot of alien stories, including books and comic books and video games, not just the movies, which are mostly about survival and often stopping Weyland-Yutani from weaponizing them. But beyond that, Alien Earth, you would think, would be telling you a lot more about what's happening on the planet, having a pretty big cast, giving you a lot of different locations, and then there's the promise of having the xenomorph possibly escape and spread out across the globe, which does happen in a couple of the comic books, but really none of that happens here. Before I get into spoilers, let's just talk about the generalities of Alien Earth for a minute. I think that this series is split up into basically 2 sections. It's the first 2.5 episodes, which are set on the crash-landed spaceship and this tower that it's crashed into, which our heroes and different characters are going into and trying to contain the situation, trying to find out what happened, and of course eventually running into a xenomorph which has already come out of a chest burster and is fully grown. And then skipping ahead a bit, the next 1.5 episodes take us back to Prodigy's island and what happens there with all these alien specimens and the different characters. There's a 1-episode flashback break, and then you get the rest of this show, which I guess would be the next 4 episodes. And those bring us back to the island and sort of conclude where the story is taking you. And I think, and I didn't expect this at the beginning, is that I think the most interesting parts of the show are the first 2.5 episodes and our flashback, which I believe is episode 5. Beyond that, I was pretty bored with everything that happened when they returned back to the island, because the show is really, really slow. It is very quiet. I think it's trying to say something, but it's not really succeeding in what it's trying to say and make it very clear or have really interesting or unique points of view. And unfortunately, I think that is the main focus of the show. I think that's totally fine. I could see people being frustrated with an alien show that isn't really tightly focused on the xenomorph and things happening with the xenomorph. Clearly, that is a conveyance for a different type of story that Hawley is interested in telling. Now, obviously, if you're an Alien fan, you already know this, so not really spoilers, because this movie is almost half a century old, but the original Alien has kind of two alien forms, essentially, which is, of course, the xenomorph, and then the revelation that Ash, our science officer on board the Nostromo, is an android. And that is a late reveal, and you sort of get this other form of inhumanity that's hiding among the crew, and that is sort of the representative of the company, and is sort of the big lesson in why you should never trust HR at the companies that you work for. So over the years, androids have been a big part of the Alien franchise. In Aliens, you have Bishop, which becomes the opposite of Ash. He is a benevolent, heroic android, but you don't trust him at first. And then beyond that, especially Alien Resurrection with Call, you get another heroic android. And then the Ridley Scott prequels with Prometheus and Covenant are all about David, and it's really David's story. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. I'm not the biggest fan of those movies, especially not Covenant. And those are sort of a continuing through line of the Alien franchise. And so here I think that Hawley is saying that we have enough of the xenomorph. There's not that much more to learn about the xenomorph, and I agree. But his interest is more in synthetic life forms. And there's actually two new sorts of synthetic life forms that are introduced here, which is we have these hybrid characters like Wendy and the rest of the children who get their consciousness taken from their dying bodies and put into these synthetic bodies, growing and kind of changing as people. And there's sort of this tension of like, who are they really? Are they really themselves, or is this just a fabrication of who they might be? Some interesting questions there. And then you have our character Morrow, who is a cyborg that was on board the crashed spaceship, the Maginot, who works for Weyland-Yutani. He has a cyborg arm, and so he's, part mechanical, and it's clearly been integrated with his nervous system as well. It's more than just his arm. So you have this sort of partially mechanized human being. So we have some interesting questions, and we have some synthetics. The most important synthetic of the show is Kirsch, played by Timothy Oliphant, one of only 4 men I've ever loved, as I've previously discussed. And he's a really interesting character because he has no humanity, so you're always sort of wondering what his own focus is, what his purpose is, how he's sort of interacting with these other characters. And then the most important human of the show, well, I guess 2, would be Boyd Cavalier, who is the head of Prodigy. And then you have Joe Hermit, who is actually Wendy's real brother, her older brother, who believed that she had died and has now become involved with this story because he is a medic that works for Prodigy that gets called to the crash. His involvement there is sort of what brings Wendy further into this battle against the xenomorph. And you get these, relationships between cyborgs, humans, synthetics, and hybrids, how they all sort of view each other, what their purposes are, and how they change or grow or shift in sort of their viewpoints on each other throughout the show. And then you have, of course, the xenomorph and these other aliens that are propelling the danger of the conflict. That is the purpose of this show. I think there are some interesting ideas, but I think the issue with Alien Earth is that it starts by posing these sorts of issues and these questions. A lot of the first episode is focused on the creation of Wendy and the other children who are sort of modeled after the Lost Boys from Peter Pan and Neverland, and their own creation, sort of their awareness of their new life. And then you get the crash and you begin to have the plot sort of kick into gear. But I don't think it does a whole lot with any of these questions as the show goes on. I don't think that Hawley has a lot of interesting points to actually make about the next stage in human evolution, or these ideas of, what is the human consciousness, what is human life, or the soul, the spirit. These sorts of questions are sort of posed at the beginning, and then they don't really go anywhere, which is unfortunate because the plot doesn't really go anywhere either. After the first 2.5 episodes, I say 2.5 because it's partway into episode 3 where we transition from the crash site back to Prodigy Island, and we're basically there for the entire rest of the show. It doesn't really go anywhere. I have no clue why this show just slows to a halt, doesn't have a whole lot of interesting things to say. It is, on the positive side, a very well-made show. There's clearly a high budget. I think the actors are doing a good job with all their different roles. Good effects, good sets, very well shot. The music is good. It's a very well-produced show, which is not surprising at all. It's for FX. FX makes high-quality stuff consistently. But here, I think it's kind of in service to nothing. Hawley does have some things that he wants to say about Earth, corporations, humanity. There's a quote from Hawley that I found that kind of explains this more in detail. I could not have predicted when I first started writing the show a few years back that we would be where we are now in terms of tech companies, etc., Hawley said. So it's like if you try to hit the zeitgeist or if you try to avoid the zeitgeist, there's kind of no way to game it in that way. So I know that one of the things that Alien is, to me, it is a movie about class. You start the first movie with space truckers, and then the second movie is about grunts. Paul Reiser is middle management at best, right? There's this sense of class as a real issue as a 1970s thing that came into it. So I wanted to bring that element into this as well. And it's just because we're on Earth, we are engaging with the top class and not just the bottom class. You can really see that throughout all of this because our focus is on Prodigy and Boy Cavalier and everyone who is working with this organization who are really at the top of the organization. We're not focused on middle management or grunts or different workers throughout the country or throughout the whole world. We're just focused mostly on the headquarters of Prodigy and the top people there, and of course our hybrids. And that's fine, but it's interesting because I suppose that Joe is the one representative of the lower class, and he's sort of seen as our representative of the people outside of Prodigy who begin to get involved with everyone there and is really looked down upon. There's an interesting element here where he is attacked by a xenomorph pretty early on, and his lung is damaged. They take his lung out and they replace it with a synthetic lung. So he has, the technology of the future has allowed him to be just fine. But then the corporation threatens him into compliance with them by saying, if you don't comply with us, you can just leave the island right now, and we will charge you in full for the lung that's in your body. So it's really playing off these ideas of insurance payments or the high cost of medical procedures and this sort of crippling debt that people can get into from that. But it's just a small touch in the show. It is interesting, but it's a very small touch. To be fair, I just think the show is too slow for its own good. Slow is fine, but if it's slow and it's focused on interesting characters, having fascinating conversations, or with really intriguing mysteries that begin to unfold, plots that you can really sink your teeth into, there's not a whole lot of plot here. We go from the crash site back to the island, and they begin to look at the alien specimens. A few things go wrong. People observe. There's some tense conversations that happen. And that's kind of it for most of the runtime until episodes 7 and 8, the finale, where things really spiral out of control. Beyond that, a lot of the scenes are like this. Here's a synthetic. Am I a human? And then we cut to a human looking at them. What are you? And that's really done much quicker than it actually happens in the show, which I think is pretty unfortunate. And that just happens over and over and over. I think it's smart that Hawley front-loaded the xenomorph and a lot of xenomorph action in the first 2 episodes, because the creature is running rampant throughout this high-rise. There's a lot of bloody action. It's pretty gross and gory at times. This xenomorph at the beginning is really, really brutal, and you get that a lot. And I think that will satisfy people at first before the show transitions into what I think Hawley really wants the show to be. The other smart move is that episode 5 is a flashback to the Maginot and everything that happened on this spaceship on its way back to Earth that causes the crash at the very beginning. And that helps to fill out characters like Morrow, played by Babu Sise. He's really great. He is one of the best things about the show, alongside Oliphant. I think they are probably two of the most interesting characters. Everyone else is doing fine. Good performances, but a lot of the characters are just not as interesting to me as them. And that gives you a lot more backstory on this character who in the first several episodes is very much our straight antagonist against our heroic hybrids. And he's very threatening, and you can see the danger that he poses, and then you begin to see him more as an actual person, which is great. But in the last few episodes, he kind of does nothing again, which is a pretty big bummer. And I think that people are probably going to say episode 5 is their favorite of this whole show. And I can very clearly see why, because it's probably my favorite too. Although maybe episode 2 might be equal to me, which is, it is a contained story. It has a full arc in it, a very clear structure. It tells a contained story from beginning to end with closure at the end, which almost none of these other episodes do. Every single episode ends on a cliffhanger. It very much feels like that old streaming TV show method of this is one giant movie chopped up into multiple parts, which I think is always a huge weakness and hurts here because Alien Earth was released almost once a week. It premiered with 2 at a time. The first 2 for its premiere, and then from there it's 1 episode per week, but every single one feels like a very incomplete story because it just kind of pushes you a little bit, stops, drops the song, there's the credits. But episode 5, All on Board the Maginot, is a complete story. That alone gives it a leg up on most of the other episodes in this show. The other big advantage is that it's very clearly echoing the original Alien, with our crew waking up and there being all these issues and tensions between them, and then things going wrong with these creatures on board. The difference is that there's multiple creatures here, and also everyone on board the Maginot is an idiot, which I've seen some people online be like, oh, well, that was on purpose. It's showing that Weyland-Yutani purposefully picked people that weren't smart, people that were willing to give up decades of their life and leave their entire family behind. And there's one character in particular that should be a lot smarter, who's like an assistant, doesn't even know what geology is. I'm sort of 50-50 on that. Is this purposefully we picked the B team or the C team or the Z team? Or is it we've just got an idiot problem? Because I think a lot of the show, aside from a few characters, has an idiot problem where the characters are just doing really stupid things that most people would not do, which I know is a lot of people's complaint about, horror movies in general. It's usually not my complaint, but I think happens a lot here. And that happens a lot in this standalone story. And I think that I enjoyed that episode a lot. It was well constructed, and it gave some screen time to other characters, some interesting dynamics, a little bit more view into the world outside of our core cast of characters, and had some good horror jumps, scares, surprises. And obviously, I think a lot of people are really going to be interested in this one specific creature that gets a good amount of time in Alien Earth, which is the T. ocellus, which is a eyeball-like creature. It's like an eyeball with tentacles. And its whole thing is that it jumps on its victims, removes one of their eyes, takes over their entire body, and uses them kind of like a puppet. But it's very clearly an intelligent creature. We begin to understand more and more as the show goes on, which I think is a really fascinating aspect, that this creature, which is horrifying to see, actually has this intelligence that could be on par with human intelligence, and adds a new dynamic to this idea of these alien creatures being encountered in space. Boy Cavalier's search for other intelligence that can apparently rival his own, and this fascination he has of wanting to try and communicate with it is cool. I like that. And this creature gets built up a good amount in the show, but then it kind of goes nowhere by the end, which again is my problem with the plot. We'll get to the finale in a little bit. And overall, an issue that I have with this show is that beyond posing its questions and having running themes throughout it, this is very much telling one giant narrative arc. And so when a TV show is doing that, and especially if it's going week by week, I try to withhold judgment on what I really think about the show until the whole story is done. I can say, well, these parts were weaker, and I wish this had been done a little bit different, or I wish they'd gotten to this faster or focused on this more. But if the story becomes a more interesting, cohesive whole by the end, and if the finale pays things off really well, then I'm willing to overlook certain flaws as we get to the end and be a little bit more satisfied. And I just think that this finale drops the ball. And before we get to that, I'll touch on a few other things that I like or dislike about Alien Earth. I think that one of the big things that people might bump on in this show is that a large portion of our characters here are adult actors playing synthetics that have children's minds inside them. But a lot of these actors are doing a really good job at portraying them. And so it's a little... it feels a little uncanny at times when you see these adults kind of acting like children, and at times it makes you want to say, like, well, this is poor acting or poor character writing, why would they do this? But most of these characters, I would say, are probably like 10, 11, 12, maybe even younger, depending. And so the taking of these children's minds, putting them into adult bodies and sending them off into this sort of huge fight against xenomorphs and all this death clearly causes PTSD, causes them to sort of question who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. Like a character like Nibs clearly becomes traumatized by the Acellus, and characters like Smee or Slightly are dealing with Morrow and trying to navigate suddenly very complex morality that they're not really well equipped for, at all. They have not matured yet to be able to really make strong decisions in the light of these really complex and horrifying realities, which I think is interesting. This theme of Peter Pan and the Lost Boys and Wendy is continuing throughout the show. It's there from the very start as this idea of like, now it's weird kind of inverse of like, you won't have to grow up, but now you're in an adult body and now you won't age at all, and the island is kind of like Neverland, or the idea that Boy Cavalier is like the Peter Pan that's leading them all, and someone like Morrow is Captain Hook, and the xenomorph maybe is like the crocodile, is kind of there. Kind of comes in and out of the show. And of course, they're all taking on these new names, both to hide their original identities and then identify them with this Lost Boys theme. Interesting enough, but I don't think that the show is saying much more than that. I come into this problem a good amount with a lot of media these days, which is that movies, TV shows, novels, what have you, will make allusions to and metaphors with older pieces of media. They'll reference back to something, a very famous novel or a song, a show, a film that everyone's very familiar with, and use it as sort of a lens and a reference for the stories being told in this new story. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, oh, it's just like that thing. Great, I get it. Is there anything else that you're saying beyond remember that thing? Are you saying something other than remember Peter Pan, remember the Lost Boys, remember Neverland, remember Captain Hook? I got it. I see it. You're having sort of a modern version of it, or a futuristic version, sci-fi version in this case. What are we saying beyond that? Are we saying something about issues of not growing up as an adult? Or are we having issues of thrusting adulthood and maturation on children before they're ready? Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about how, technology is stunting our growth? Or, these types of things could be interesting metaphors to use through the lens of Peter Pan in an alien show. And it could make a really interesting blend as we talk about consciousness, alien life, technological advancements, but I don't think the show is actually saying anything beyond saying, hey, Peter Pan. That's it. That's all it's really saying. And unfortunately, I don't think it really gets beyond that. So it is frustrating to me, especially because I think that some of these characters that make up the Lost Boys there's not really anything that's like done with them. Some have some arcs, but a character like Curly just kind of stands there the whole time as like, I'm the specialist one, and then doesn't do anything like literally ever in the entire show. Very strange. So unfortunately, I just don't think that it goes anywhere. But again, I think that the performances are good. If you're looking for some good like xenomorph moments, they're in there. Or you're looking for some interesting like alien creatures, there's other ones. Of course, like I said, the TSLS, the eyeball creature, is really interesting. The xenomorphs are pretty well done. I'm not a huge fan of the way their head molds are in this one. I think they've been done better in basically every past Alien film. But the rest of the creatures just kind of have a moment of horror. There's these ticks that like suck your blood completely dry in an instant. They're pretty horrifying. There's giant flies that can like eat inorganic matter, but that one doesn't work super well for me. And then there's this giant plant-like creature that just kind of stands there menacingly in the background for most of this whole show. And when he finally does strike, I think it's kind of disappointing. With all that said, let's get into some spoilers at the very end. Let's talk about the finale. So when it comes to reviewing TV or movies or whatever I talk about on this channel, you'll probably notice a recurring theme, which is that I kind of subscribe to Roger Ebert's view of how to critique a piece of art, which is that to evaluate what it's trying to do and how well it succeeds in actually doing that thing, which is why I'm kind of disappointed overall with Alien Earth. The original Alien is telling a really focused survival story with some commentary on corporate greed and exploitation, but it's mostly about, oh geez, there's this giant crazy monster that's going to get inside you, and body horror and all these sorts of things, and it does it really, really well. A+, one of the best movies ever. Alien Earth is trying to unpack human consciousness amidst technological evolution and, corporate greed and exploitation and control. And that's what leads us to the finale and why I think it's overall a disappointing finale and a disappointing season of a TV show. It all kind of leads up to this conflict that happens at the end of episode 7, which is that Wendy has bonded with one of the xenomorphs, and because she is this synthetic form, she's able to understand and copy their communication, and then begins to communicate with the aliens and sort of almost becomes like a queen to them, and controls them, can sick them on people, tell them to do certain things. And it's this growing menace throughout the second half of the season, culminates with her telling the xenomorph to attack these different prodigy soldiers that are friends with her brother and are there to try and extract them, because all the species have gone out of control. And then Joe knocks out one of the synthetics, one of the hybrids, Nibs, and then there's going to be this big conflict between the brother and sister, and that's how episode 7 ends. But then episode 8, they've been captured. They're in a little jail inside Prodigy, and eventually they break out, and there's xenomorphs sort of running around. There's finally a full physical confrontation between Kirsch and Morrow, which we've seen building up throughout the whole season. That's very underwhelming. That doesn't really go anywhere. There's some chasing around of Boy Cavalier, and then it just kind of ends. It ends with Wendy is in control of the 2 xenomorphs that have been unleashed on the island. Our original heads of Prodigy and Morrow have been captured and are now locked in a cell. And Wendy and the other hybrid children, along with Joe, are now in charge. And she says, now we rule. And Wayland Yutani is about to invade the island in their continued efforts to recover the specimens that they brought back from space. So that's where it all ends. That's the end. And I don't think it's very interesting. I think one of the issues that happens a lot, especially with shows that are released weekly, is speculation and theories on, oh, this is where the show's going to go here, and the show's going to go there, and this person's going to do this, and this alien's going to get in this guy's eye, and this person's going to be turned into this, and he's going to die, and she's going to live, and he's going to make this decision, and we just speculate and speculate with the free time. And then it inevitably leads to disappointment when the show that was made months ago or years ago doesn't exactly go the way that we want. That's why I try and avoid speculation, and I just say, I like it or I don't like it. I'm hoping maybe it goes this way, but maybe not. And I just say, okay, lead me where you're going to go, and I'll say whether I like it or not. And it led me where I wanted to go, and I didn't like where it went because it didn't really go anywhere interesting. It's an incomplete thought. At the end of this show, end of the season, it's an incomplete thought. It doesn't have an interesting conclusion. It doesn't have complete commentary on what it's talking about. It's just, oh, well, there's going to be some more conflict. And it's not interesting. It doesn't have a really big hook besides there'll be more fighting. And I don't think that it has a lot to say in the end about these ideas of consciousness, as Wendy has come into her own and kind of pushed off the adults and the corporate heads that have been controlling her, and that's kind of it. That's where it goes, and that's where it ends. To be continued, and I'm not really a fan. See you in 2 to 3 years, right? At the moment of making this, there has not been a decision about renewing the show yet. I know it's done well, so I would be pretty surprised if it doesn't get renewed. And if it does get renewed, maybe it will make this season look a lot better in retrospect, because it will take the ideas that are introduced and really live them out to a much more full and interesting degree. But still, I feel like this is a lot of a waste of time. And I don't know if I would really recommend it. I don't know if I would recommend Alien Earth to non-fans of Alien. And really, I would only recommend Alien Earth to fans of Alien to say, here's some more of that thing you like, but I don't know if you're really going to like it all that much. I was a big fan of Alien Romulus. I enjoyed that a ton. And some of the Alien comics have been good. This is just one specific instance of this franchise that I'm not really liking. Hawley also said something about this season, now that it's come to a close, that I think kind of reflects a little poorly on season 1 of Alien Earth. This whole thing is a proof of concept experiment to see if enough people on the planet want to watch an Alien TV show to justify the expense of a second and third season of an Alien TV show. So for me, I never hedge my bets. This is not a closed-ended season. This chapter is closed, but Yutani troops are landing. The balance of power has shifted. These children have no idea what's coming. The last line of "Now we rule" is triumphant and uplifting, but cut to 10 minutes later, what is going to be happening? So I like that it has that real-time urgency to it. So obviously Hawley has a lot of plans for season 2 and 3, and maybe they'll get made and maybe they won't, but if they don't get made, this is going to look really bad in retrospect. Talking about this really quick and the endings of these shows, the final episode ends with Animal by Pearl Jam, one of my favorite songs from one of my favorite bands, and every single episode of the show ends with some sort of needle drop. You have Tool and you have Queens of the Stone Age, and you have all sorts of different bands like Black Sabbath that I really, really like, playing songs that I really like too, and it sort of is like, well, that episode kind of ended weakly, but here's a great banger of a song that you're really going to love, and please forget that this show wasn't very good. And that's what the finale is also, and it does remind me of The Bear, which is one of my favorite shows in season 2, where they play Animal, and they also end the very first episode of The Bear with Animal, and that is a show that knows exactly how to use pre-existing songs and needle drops to underscore and emphasize the already existing emotion and meaning of a scene, and it works so freaking well. As we come to the end of my discussion on Alien Earth, just want to talk for a minute about The Bear Season 4, because I didn't talk about it. I loved The Bear Season 4. I know that Season 3 split a lot of people and made some people kind of, worn out on the show. And I get that season was kind of weak. It's a lot better in the context of Season 4 because it sets up a lot with Season 4. And Season 4 pays off so much of Season 3 and all the other seasons. I loved it. Season 4 is finally a season about healing and closure and moving forward, whereas Season 3 was about being stuck. And I found every episode of that show in season 4 to be really emotional and really satisfying, and to give you great moments with characters that I felt very, very connected to for multiple years. And I loved it. It made interesting choices. It had a unique focus from each episode. It did really fascinating things with each character that I really loved, and I found myself often crying in most episodes of season 4. It was a really, really special season to me. I really enjoyed it. I get if maybe people didn't care as much after a few seasons. I loved it. And again, that's on FX. And that is a show that is so tightly focused on its ideas and its characters that I just loved it so much. I'm excited for more. And, speaking of other shows and shows that are going on right now, Peacemaker is sort of in the middle of its season. At the time of recording this, there's 3 Peacemaker episodes left. And I'm interested to see where the show goes, because I have felt the last few episodes to be a little stagnant. I thought that the plot would move a little faster than what actually was. But it was funny watching that in tandem with Alien Earth, because even in the episodes that did not move forward in the ways that I wanted them to, I loved the characters and what they did. I was interested in their decisions, and I was fully invested even when the plot wasn't progressing at the rate that I wanted it to, which is the opposite with Alien Earth, where it would not go anywhere, and I did not care about most of the characters. Therefore, it was really hard for me to stay invested in the show. Those are just some contrasts to everything. In regards to other new shows that I've been watching this year, I really love Limitless with Chris Hemsworth. That second season of that show came out. I hadn't seen the first season. I watched it all. I watched so many episodes really fast, just in the span of a few weeks. Love that show. An amazing, documentary show about, unlocking human potential, which is kind of the theme of Alien Earth, but done in a much more interesting, personal, focused way that was real. And I love that show too. So it's not like I'm just some hater. There's plenty of other shows that I love, new and old. And just this was not my style. And it was unfortunately Alien mid. So thank you for watching today. And I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons and my members for their support. If you want to be a patron or member, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video. The September exclusive review is Cloverfield, and I'm going to be getting some exclusive reviews for October. As you can see in the background, I have already been filming some Halloween-themed videos that are going to be starting next week, so I hope that you tune in as we kick off the Halloween season with David Gordon Green's Halloween reboot trilogy. That is already in the can. And again, thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought about Alien Earth. If you agree with me or if you're completely opposite, all good. And I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and I'll see you again soon.